All right. Well, hey, I'm going to do something different this time. A book review of sorts, more of a response. No Silver Bullets by Daniel M. I've been working on this for a long time. It was handed to me by someone from the church, and I've been kind of dragging it along and dragging along today. Decided I'm just going to sit down, finish it, and also just kind of do a review chapter by chapter, make sure I understand it. Um, I don't know the author, Daniel M. I don't actually know him very well, but I know the circle he deals in. Tom Rayner, Tim Keller, Ed Stetzer. Um, these are not people that have made an incredible impact on me. It's just not the group that I've spent a lot of time in, but I do know those names. I know the people. I know the world that Pastor M kind of has revolved around, and that though I don't know him, that gives me enough security in who he is. So, without further ado, No Silver Bullets by Daniel M. If I'm saying that correctly. So, first of all, the premise of the book, the as laid out in chapter one, primarily that discipleship is through it's directional, um, as opposed to a destination. It's not something you ever arrive at. Which, amen, I agree with absolutely 100%. The overall premise of this book, absolute agreement. And think it's very, not just do I agree, but I think it's very important. It's foundational for understanding discipleship. Uh, to put it in my words, spiritual maturity is dictated by the level of pursuit that in the Lord. Um, I will point out that there is, in fact, a destination. Um, that destination is glorification. It's after this life. I think that's important theologically. However, it's not a destination we will ever achieve. I disagree with Methodist Pentecostals. There is no entire sanctification. So while we're on this planet, it's a direction, it's a trajectory. The second point from chapter one, besides basic fact, is that we need accountability. I'll point out that while I think this church we're pretty solid on understanding that discipleship is a direction, we're not as solid on the accountability, and that's both as each individual who constitutes the church, and also from a leadership standpoint. This is what I, as the pastor, I'm trying to work on. We're talking about discipleship, and discipline being closely tied. Discipline, church discipline, membership. We're going over this on Sunday nights. Fact is, we're not there yet. We don't have the reps in yet. But that's one thing I'm hoping we can begin to fix. Chapter two. I've talked about this before on Wednesdays in particular. We should all be in the business of discipleship, all of us. And then he talks about, in chapter 2, he talks about the 70-20-10 principle, the 70% learn by doing, 20% by interaction, 10% by listening. Sorry, church, I am who I am. I know it's more fun to learn through interaction, but I'm a lecturer. That's what I do. I can work on this. Nonetheless, this is where I'm at. This is who I am. This is how I teach. So I can recognize improvements, but it's not going to change overnight. In any case, he also talks about in chapter 2 inputs versus outputs. This is simply the idea that I need to see where I want the church to be, and I'm going to put into the church what is necessary to get that desired result. This is a good way of thinking. This is a necessary way of thinking. I will also add the caveat and hesitation there that it's not as simple as a mathematical equation. It's not a if you put this in, you will get this out. If as long as we recognize that and don't have those kind of expectations, I think we're okay. Chapter 3, perhaps one of the chapters I have the most hesitation with, primarily because he talks about this idea of flipping the classroom, which involves like basically y'all do self study, and then our communal time is instead of going over the material, is kind of going over the application of the material. It's like the lecture and the lab. The lecture you do at home, the lab we do together, that kind of stuff. He talks, I believe this is the chapter where he talks about the being the guide on the side, that kind of thing. How many times have we been part of a Bible study where the Bible study uses a book and nobody reads the book before, or if they did, they crammed it 30 minutes before they arrived just so they could sound like they were up to date. And by the way, this is not just an indictment on y'all. In the association, the pastors do the same thing. Our director at the association will have us read a book, and half the time us pastors show up and we haven't read the book. So some of the ideas from chapter 3, great if it worked. Fact is, a lot of times it doesn't pan out. It's a little bit idealistic is what I'm saying. So most of the time, for our church, the principles from chapter 3 aren't going to be applied. I think it's good, as with much of this book, it's good to think about perhaps a good goal. I don't know that we'll be able to apply it directly and immediately. Chapter 4, he talks about the church needing to be the sign, instrument, and foretaste of God's kingdom. Amen and amen. He talks about not being a hypocrite. He talks about function being more important than form, which I could see this perhaps being a more controversial point, but it's a point that I happen to be in complete agreement with. Even like he brings up Sunday school. Well, I'm a very staunch supporter of Sunday school and many of these forms, but just because I support the forms, just because I think these forms are good and support the function, doesn't mean that we should confuse the fact that they serve the function. So I take his point well. He also talks about the different spheres of the public life. So you got the public life, social life, I forget all the strata he's got, down to the individual one-on-one. So how we interact at each level. A lot of this section doesn't apply for our church simply because we're a smaller church. So he talks about a lot of specific examples where the churches are, the whole thing is them trying to break down into smaller groups. Well, we're already a smaller group, so some of that doesn't directly apply. Chapter 5, I really dislike buzzwords like missional. Part of this comes from the Army, where you have to use the buzzwords to make the commander happy, to sound smart, like you know all your doctrine. I don't like it. However, saying that, chapter 5, I pretty much down the line agree. I would perhaps be less apt to use some of the acronyms. They're helpful, they're good, they're based in truth, but I'd be a little bit more apt to try to find the scriptures that say the same thing and point to the scriptures instead of the nice, neat little acronyms and stuff. But anyway, in point, chapter 5, the church is meant to be missional. I've talked about this before. Discipleship and evangelism are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. And to suggest that you can is to misunderstand reality. Chapter 6, a lot of chapter 6 is how to maneuver politically. Is the best way I know how to summarize this chapter. I fail in a lot of ways. I recognize this is another one of my weaknesses, how to move in a way so as to not anger anyone, but also to not be apathetic. So there's a lot of lessons. I think chapter 6 is a very good chapter for me personally to learn from, but it's not something I'm very good at. Chapter 7 is so he's talking a lot about vision here. He has this concept of a value audit, which is basically us comparing if we see eye to eye on things. Are our values in the same place? Yes or no? I thought that idea was very potentially helpful, very good. But it's all set within this idea. I don't think he uses the phrase, if you did, I missed it, but I'll use the phrase to describe it, vision casting. It's a very popular idea of leadership, and I dislike it very much. I'm not a vision caster. That's not my job. God has set his vision for the church, and I abide by that vision. And you say, well, that's great, but then you make it applicable to the specific context in which your church is set. And I say, touche. However, it seems to me to be just a little bit counter to the whole first point. We're not setting up this vision of what we can be. That's our destination. And then everything we do is just to drive at that destination. We set the trajectory we should be on, which is set by the Bible, and we make sure we are in parallel to that trajectory. And we either achieve that trajectory or not. It's less about this is what our church will look like in 30 years. So I push back against that a little bit, even though he has a lot of good ideas here, and I'm not at all slamming him. I just some of this is take it and some of it is leave it. Chapter 8, which is the final chapter of the book, so to quote him briefly, he says, "How can you normalize Bible reading in your church?" End quote. And then he goes on to talk about how good it would be if that happened. He never really answered it. Pastor Daniel M., I need the answer to this question. How can I normalize Bible reading in our church? This would be a very helpful and good thing. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of a funny little thing there. And then he talks about newcomers. And he makes a very, very helpful, I think, point here. Something that is beneficial to me to consider, and I think all of us to consider. He talks about newcomers. The fact is, life is such that we are losing our mature Christians and gaining immature Christians at a regular rate. This is just life. This is the life of the church. We're always losing mature Christians and gaining immature Christians. And our job as a church is to disciple and make immature mature. And about the time you get somebody in a good place, they're at the end of their life, and they either can no longer function or they die, and they're replaced by somebody who doesn't know the first thing about the God that they're following. And we it's this constant thing. And that's okay. We never arrive, and that goes back to the premise of the book. We are always in the middle of this chaos of the endeavor. We never arrive. And this is a good warning, and also in a way a very good encouragement to us, which kind of goes back to the title of the book, No Silver Bullets. There is no thing we do which suddenly, there we go, we're good. So keep living the life. I do, after reading it, I'm more than happy to encourage and say this is worth the read. No Silver Bullets by Daniel M. to get your mind going on a great many of these discipleship issues. So appreciate your time and see y'all later.